Hello and welcome to Money Talks with Nevada Money Mentors. I'm Devin Cooley, your host today. And today we're joined by a professor for the University of Nevada, Reno, Tom Liesz. How you doing, Tom Liesz?
As far as I can do with the pandemic and social distancing and everything else, but feeling pretty good.
Great, great. Yeah, it's definitely a crazy time right now. But before we kind of get into the weeds of it, how about you just kind of introduce who you are for those who don't know, kind of what you do for the university, your responsibilities?
Okay, well, my official title is Teaching Assistant Professor of Finance. And so as far as that goes, I teach a number of different undergraduate courses. The one I teach the most is the Introduction to Financial Management, or Finance 301, and that's required by all the business majors, and they don't always like to take it, but it's really important. I mean, every business program in the country requires a finance class, at least one. So that's our required class here. And this about 2 years ago, the dean asked me to develop a personal finance class. And so I put that as Finance 101. And that's been open to anybody in the university can take that. And that's been a lot of fun as we've developed that, because it's grown, it almost doubled in size from last spring to this past spring. And then we got majors, all different majors and all different categories, freshmen through seniors, and that's been a lot of fun. And then I also sometimes teach a special topics class, Finance 493, also related to personal and family financial stuff. So that's pretty much what I do. Then I was, for a while, the only finance advisor for a while, which meant I had to deal with the students trying to figure out how to get into the program and how to work the way around the program and what have you. I've got help with that now with two of the newer, younger professors. So, and then of course, part of our job is doing some research and publishing, and I've been mostly working on pedagogical stuff. And so I've had, I think, 3 or 4 papers in the last 5 years, so that keeps me up to date. And that's pretty much the life of a professor at UNR.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I had the pleasure of being in your Finance 101 class a little while ago, and I loved the class and everything that you taught in it. But I know that some students are harder to reach, and obviously not everyone is as interested in finance as someone in the field might be. So how do you kind of break into like those students and kind of get them interested, or are you kind of surprised with how little students know about finance when they reach your class?
Well, believe me, the average American knows very little about finance. I mean, there's all these little tests on financial literacy, and most people do not score very well in on tests of financial literacy, and that's, I think, a shortcoming in general in our society. And I'm glad to see more and more high schools are starting to pick up some personal finance classes, and universities as well. I mean, that's why the dean had asked me to put that one together this last couple of years now. But financial illiteracy is a problem, because one thing that might be good out of this pandemic is people are becoming a lot more aware of finances than they were. And when you're just in a job, you get a steady paycheck and you have your expenditures, you get in a routine, you don't really think about it. When that routine is disrupted is when it really tests, how much do you really understand about finance. And one of my students I had, gosh, I hate thinking how long it was, probably 20 years ago, I had a student in class, and every time we started a new topic, she sat in the front row and she'd say, "Now, why should I care about this?" And my first thought was, because I was a smart ass kid growing up in Chicago, and so I said, she's just another smart ass. But then the more I thought about it, I said, that's a great question. Why should you care about this topic? And so you might remember in our class that you had with me, in all my classes, every time we start a new chapter, a new topic, the very first thing we talk about is, why should you care? And it talks about the relevance of the things that we're going to study in that chapter. and how it's going to impact you, not just personally, but professionally as well. And I think that helps a little bit getting students on board with what we're trying to do. And I've always been of the mind that if you can show the relevance of something, you're halfway home and getting people to be interested in wanting to learn it. Uh, one thing that's different from when I first started, students today, on average, don't seem to want to read as much as students in the past. And that's a little bit of a concern to me, because it's important to be able to read things. And um, my goal is to enhance what people read. So we obviously cover important points out of textbook chapters, but I always add a lot more stuff in it. I love bringing stuff, and you can probably remember, almost every week I brought in stuff from the Wall Street Journal that was going on right that day or right that week, and to show you, look, here's stuff we're studying about. Here it's being applied right in front of our eyes, right? And if I can do that, then I figure more than halfway home and getting people to spend the time to understand it and see how they can use it in their own lives.
No, yeah, I definitely agree on that point. I think that's the biggest part of finance, is that it's going to impact your life sometime in the future if it hasn't already. And that's kind of a big problem. People don't realize it till it's too late, and that's kind of what this pandemic is kind of showing, right? Is that they should have planned ahead. Obviously, no one could have planned for this, but having a good foundation would kind of ease the impact of any like financial hardship you might have.
I mean, there was that famous 2019 study by the Federal Reserve, which we talked about when I had you in class, was that 4 out of 10 Americans couldn't come up with $400 in an emergency, and that's pretty scary, because I mean $400 is one car repair, one trip to the emergency room, and you're $400 in a hurry, right? And so one of my mantras has always been, you have to start saving. I mean, saving is so important, and it's not something that you can say, "Oh, I'll do it later," okay? Because then you say, "I'm going to do it later." Later almost never comes, or it comes too late to really be of any help. And so, if there's one thing this pandemic really brought out, was just how overburdened, in debt most Americans were. When they were working and had a steady paycheck, they could make the house and rent payments and the car payments and go out every Friday. Now that those steady paychecks are gone, people are really in trouble. And the ones who are weathering the storm the best are the ones who built up a good emergency fund. And in the personal finance side, we often talk about, at a minimum, you should try to have 3 months of expenditures put away in an emergency fund, so that if something bad happened, you could totally cover your costs for at least 3 months. And guess what percent of Americans can do that?
Not many, I'm assuming.
It's less than 25% have 3 months worth of liquid assets, that they could easily use for paying short-term bills until something happens. And it's a little worrisome to me, with stuff I've been reading lately about the folks who are out of work right now. Something like 68% of them, if I remember the study, it was a University of Chicago study that just was published last week, but something like around 68% of the folks that are getting that extra stimulus, $600 a week,
Yeah.
actually will make more staying on unemployment than going back to work.
Yeah. I've seen that same statistic, and it was a little shocking to read. And I know, especially at my level, right, being a very young adult, that a lot of my peers are making probably 2 times as much they would be making if they were actually at work. So it's a hard thing to follow. Do you want to just keep on being on this like treadmill of unemployment payments, or go back to work where you might not even be safe? And I know that's probably a big struggle for lawmakers, Senate, to pass a bill that kind of levels that playing field. But I guess at our state, we just have to kind of wait it out, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, it's, there, you might have read in the local paper, there was a gentleman here who owns 2 or 3 restaurants in town, and he's not even going to try to open them till after July 31st, because that's the end of those, at least right now, it's the end of that extra $600. But he couldn't get enough of his workers to want to come back. So it's kind of, it throws a little monkey wrench in getting the economy going again. But to my way of thinking, most people on average uh, like to work. Um, I think that especially if you find a job that you really enjoy, it's a pleasure. I mean, I've enjoyed teaching. I've been teaching a long time, and I really enjoy it. I mean, if I didn't enjoy it, it would be a drag, right? But
Yeah.
I don't mind it at all. So.
And that's kind of a beautiful transition to what I want to get onto next, is that I wanted to know how, why, and when you got into finance. When was the first moment you interacted with a financial class?
Oh boy. So that's an interesting thing about that, because when I was an undergraduate, I was actually a public relations major, and I
Wow.
had 2 minors. I had a minor in journalism and a minor in business. And I remember being in that minor in business, and those were some of the toughest classes. And I was thinking, oh, I'm so glad, when I finished that minor. Then I got my first job. I went to Southern Illinois University down in Carbondale, Illinois, but my first job was working for a wine importer outside of Chicago. And I worked with them for about a year. It's kind of an interesting kind of company. But the more I could see how business worked, I said, man, all that stuff I learned in that business minor is really making a lot of sense. And then I went on, I got a really nice job with the Department of Employment Security in downtown Chicago. And that's when it really came to light, just how important business in general, but finance in particular was. And so when I decided to go for a master's degree in business, I chose finance as a major. And I say the first finance class I took, it just clicked. I mean, I've always had kind of a quantitative mind, which helps, but just to see the practicality of it, because I had, going to school, and then I was out on my own for about 3 or 4 years before going back to school. And it all made sense to me. I mean, everything made sense about why business is so important, and why, I liked all aspects of it. I enjoyed marketing almost as much as finance, but finance to me was just a real, it was something that just made total sense to me, and it was so interesting. And as I started making a little bit more money and had the ability to start investing, being able to actually apply the stuff that I saw in class was really useful. And then I started subscribing to Wall Street Journal when I was about 28 years old, and I have subscribed ever since. And I just love reading about investing and finance in general, and just it helps to understand, basically how the world works. Because the mantra I have in my class in 301 is everything eventually comes down to finance. Now, I don't care what the decision is, it always eventually comes down to finance. So if you want to buy something, you got to figure out how to pay for it. You want to hire somebody, you got to figure out how to make payroll, right? You want to need inventory, you got to go contact the supplier and pay them. So everything you do is going to come back to finance eventually. And it's just as true in personal finance as it is in corporate finance.
Yeah. So you would kind of say that while finance is definitely your career and teaching it is your career right now, you would say it's kind of a lifestyle for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a real passion. I mean, with having, being a finance professor, you get asked to do a lot of different things. I've been on boards of directors of my church. I've been on boards of directors of credit unions. When my son was in the Marine Corps, he and his friends would ask me questions all the time about how to invest their money, because there
Yeah.
are places where they were making money, but not having a lot of places to spend it. Places like Iraq and Afghanistan. But I was helping all these young Marines on a regular basis. Just trying to put a little bit of common sense and stability into what they were doing. And I've had neighbors ask me questions. One of my neighbors recently was widowed, and her husband had handled all the finances. And this is not an atypical thing. This happens fairly commonly. That one of the spouses of a marriage wind up being in charge of finances, and the other one doesn't always know what's going on. If something happens to that first one, it's a real struggle to get that all put together. So I helped my neighbor help get her finances together. So because she was scared to death that she was gonna, how is she gonna pay monthly bills? But fortunately, her husband had left her in really good shape, but she didn't even realize it because she didn't know anything about finances. But yeah, I wind up doing a lot of stuff for friends and family and neighbors, asking me questions about it all the time.
Okay. And obviously that's heartwarming to hear. And I think that's kind of contradictory to what a lot of people would think about people that are in finance. When they think of finance, they think of Wall Street and kind of, money hungry people. But I think that they don't see, the personal finance side of it and kind of holistically financial literacy type environment that it could be potentially. So do you think that you've been mostly a part of financial advising, like helping people out and obviously teaching?
Well, I mean, that's always been a fun part of it to me. And I think almost everybody that I've ever worked with in finance is like that. They're more than willing to help people out who ask them. And we get students coming to see us all the time asking about stuff, or students who even graduated 2 or 3 years ago say, "Hey, I just got an email over the weekend from a gentleman I had in class, I think 3 years ago now, and he's got a nice job, and he was asking me some advice about his 401k plan." So I don't mind doing that, and most of the finance people I've known are pretty much like that. Wall Street gets a kind of I think an unwarranted bad view in the public, and a lot of the mainstream media, beat on capitalism and greedy Wall Street and stuff. But you got to look and see, capitalism is what allowed our country to be the richest country with the most opportunities in the world. I mean, you don't see people, down at the borders trying to get in here because we're some, country that doesn't respect people's rights or abilities to earn a living. And capitalism is what brought everything that's yours in your room in my room. And it's a system that's a lot based on meritocracy. The more things you can do for the good, the better the rewards you generally get. And that's I don't see anything wrong with that. And the key to me has always been understanding that these big businesses create tens of thousands of jobs and have billions of dollars of payroll that goes right into the economy. And I don't know how we could possibly have been anywhere near as successful as a country if we hadn't had this system. It's countries around the world still look at us as the model of what a system ought to be like. That provides opportunities for people to get ahead. If they've got something, I would say, if you can produce something of value, you're going to find an opportunity to do that, and you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that sentiment. I could see why, some people might want to debate, and, the types of economy is just recently a very hot button subject. And that could be debated either way. But why is it that you chose to be, a finance professor than, let's say, an economics professor? Did you see any difference between that? Did you just tend to like finance more?
Well, I mean, it was kind of funny when I was in my MBA program, we got to choose a few electives,
Mhm.
and I actually had chosen half of my electives in finance and half in marketing.
Okay.
And I was at that time the first student they had there. This is down in Arizona. I was the first student who'd ever taken or chosen to take marketing and finance. It's usually they're kind of left brain, right
Yeah.
brain sort of thing. But I really liked marketing research. That was one of my favorite classes I took was marketing research. And I actually kind of saw myself maybe even working as a marketing researcher. I like the statistics of it. I like the, building surveys. And to me, that was very appealing.
Hmm.
Uh, but finance, all the things that in finance in general, you've got three major areas you can focus on. If you want to go work for a company on the corporate finance side, there's just so many wonderful opportunities for people in corporate finance.
Yeah.
Uh, if you want to go on the investing side of it, on the personal finance side, again, there's many opportunities. Everything. I mean, look at all these companies like you probably notice around Reno and other places. There's several Edward D. Jones. Those are independent agencies, almost like a franchise. Uh, but then there's all these independent folks too. So you can hang up your own shingle, as they say, or you could go to where every major bank has personal finance people. I mean, there's tons of things that you can do on the investing and personal finance side. And I did mention on the banking side, if you want to go work on the banking side, or you don't think about it as often, but besides just banks, you have insurance companies and pension funds and all these mutual funds, all of those hire finance related people
Hmm.
to do a number of different things. And so to me, finances, it opens a lot of different kind of doors, but I think you have to obviously have at least a little bit of interest and bent for quantitative things, because there's obviously a lot of quantitative parts. But yeah, but economics, I mean, I enjoyed economics,
Hmm.
but there's not as many entry level jobs for someone with especially with a bachelor's degree in economics. There's not a lot of just here's entry jobs for economics, but whereas finance had a lot of opportunities.
Yeah. And where did that kind of, put you? What was your kind of story in the finance career that led you to be a teacher or a professor, that rather?
Well, that was a good story too, because um, when I was in my MBA program, I had absolutely zero idea of being a teacher, none.
Uh-huh.
But in that program, they had it. I don't know if it's still like that, but at the time I was there, it required a lot of presentations, some individual, some in small groups, but we presented a lot. And towards the end of my last semester there, I had actually been interviewing for a number of jobs, including a marketing research job. But the dean called me in his office, and so he asked me if I'd ever thought about being college instructor, and I said no. He says that the fact they've been talking about and is that they thought that my presentations were really good, and that they thought I did a good job of explaining stuff, and that as a result, I probably could be a pretty good college instructor. I said, well, how do you even do that? I had no idea. How the heck do you even do that? And they had a publication at the time, which I don't know if it's still in existence, called the Journal of Higher Education. And in the journal, they had job ads in there. And so the dean explained to me that with a master's degree, I would probably be best off trying to get on at a community college. This is kind of hard to get in a four-year school with just about a master's degree. So I looked it up and I found an ad for a business instructor in Northwest Community College in Powell, Wyoming. I said, I never heard of Powell, Wyoming.
Me neither. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not far from Cody up in the northwest corner. It's really a nice area. But anyway, so I applied for that job, and it didn't take very long. They got back to me and flew me out for an interview, and it was fascinating. I had dinner with the president and his wife and the dean and his wife, and then had to make a presentation in class one day and do a number of different things. But I got back, and a couple of days later, there was an offer in the mail. So I said, well, I got nothing else planned. Let's just try. My goal was, I said, look, I'm going to try it for 2 years, is what I said. And if I didn't like it after 2 years, I'll go do something else. But if I really enjoy it, then I'm just going to keep at it. And 40 years later, here I am.
Wow. So yeah, that is a pretty interesting story. Who would have thought? When did you start with the university?
Well, when I was my career took me a couple different places, but I was up at in Moscow, Idaho. I was actually working for Washington State University as a budget analyst,
Uh-huh.
and just teaching part time with my master's degree. And then the folks at Idaho said, we wouldn't mind having you be a full-time person, but you have to get a PhD. So I started working part-time on a PhD while also having my job as an analyst. And I wound up getting a PhD in financial administration, and then Idaho hired me full-time. So, and I spent most of my career teaching at University of Idaho.
Mhm.
But it's just been fun. I mean, I had, you go to conferences, and I met, I don't know if you know Dr. Rahul Bhargava here, but
Heard the name.
yeah, he and I have been friends for a long, long time. But he's the one who got me to come for a 1 year visiting professorship, and that was, I think, in 2005. And so I took 1 year off from Idaho and came down here and taught for a year. And then after that, I came almost every summer and taught some 301 classes in the summers. And they kept asking me to apply every time there was an opening. They kept asking me to apply for it. But I really did like it up in North Idaho. But finally, we got to a point where my wife was about to retire from her job, and there was an opening here, and I said, I always kind of thought I'd like to retire in Reno. So I
Yeah.
said, why not get an early start and come and teach here till retirement? So
There you go. And how long till you think that's the plan? How long till retirement do you think?
well, I can go anytime. I've got enough years in, and I've been actually thinking about it with what's going on now with we're for sure going to face some budget cuts for next year,
Yeah.
and which is going to likely include furloughing faculty.
Mhm.
And so this might be a good time. I've got to think about it here now, but this is not a bad time for me either. The good thing is, my own retirement accounts, of course, took a hit like everybody else,
Yeah.
but I had moved things around enough that it wasn't that bad a hit, and the market's actually come back to where I'm not down very much at all from where I was before the pandemic hit. And I'll tell you something kind of funny too, is all through the latter half of the spring semester, our finance faculty did a Zoom meeting every Friday morning,
Uh-huh.
just to kind of catch up, and there's 9 of us, and without ever talking about it amongst ourselves, all 9 of us had done pretty much the same thing. We moved a little bit out of the riskier stuff into safer things. We had certain stocks that we were looking at, because finance people think exactly opposite of the crowd. When that market started dropping like that, we moved some things at safety, but we also had our whole list of buys, right? And every single one of us had bought something. And we compare our notes of what we were each investing in, but it was fun. I guess after a while, the finance people all kind of think alike,
No,
but
that shows kind of the impact that, obviously having a career in finance teaches you everything you need to know. How has that really impacted you in, your personal life? Obviously, you're married, having kids. What was it like to know everything about, finance that you could, but also have to, finance your children and finance like a marriage and whatnot?
oh yeah, I mean, you had we had college funds for the kids. My son though went in the Marine Corps, so so he didn't need his college. But yeah, I mean, it's, you've got a lot of interesting choices to have to make. And I was pretty fortunate that at least when our kids were smaller, I was able to make enough money that my wife didn't have to work. And she was able to stay at home, so we didn't have to worry about taking kids to daycare and all those expenses. And then once they were old enough to start going to school, she went back part-time at first and finally back to full-time. So that worked out really well. And a big part of it, I don't know if you remember this from personal finance, but remember we said there's only two pieces to the equation if you really boil it down. It's income and outflow, right? And it's not particularly easy to increase the income side. You can take part-time jobs and keep trying to find little better jobs, what have you, but it's a lot easier to try to control the outflows or control the spending side, right? And so for many years, we lived in a home that fit our needs, but it was nothing fancy at all. I mean, we could have obviously afforded a lot nicer house. We could have afforded to have newer cars, but we chose to not do those things and focus on the savings part. And that was the big difference, I think, for us was that we never had a time where we were overburdened with debt. And that kind of becomes a habit after a while, to where even though now, for instance, we're a lot more comfortable, I still have, I drive a 16-year-old car. I keep thinking that one, my wife and I are debating if I should get a little newer car, but it's perfectly fine. It does everything I need it to do. There's no need for me to take out a car loan right now. Although I can obviously afford it, I'm not going to do it because I like the idea of controlling the spending side. And then if you're not spending the money, guess what? You're either consuming something with it or you're saving. And we are big on the saving and investing side.
And obviously that might be the tip that you might give to students nowadays, like let's say me or any other college student, right? Would it just be to not spend on luxury items, or control your spending?
Well, I don't know I think I did it in your class, because I usually try to do it in all the 101s, but did I have you track your spending for a month?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now you can chime in about how valuable you thought it was, but I think that's one of the best things anybody can do. I don't care what age you are, where you're at in your lifestyle. Most people have no clue how they're spending their money. And if you spend just 1 month, ideally 2 is better, but at least 1 month keeping track of everything you spend on a daily basis, you'd be surprised at what you find out.
Yeah, no, definitely. Since then, I've been tracking my expenses every month. And that's what we do at Nevada My Mentors. That's one of the first things we do is we help evaluate kind of their budget, and they come back with their spending. And it usually shocks a lot of people. Typically, maybe not in a time like this, but it's usually going out to eat, like getting Cane's or In-N-Out or something. They come back and they're like, whoa, I spent $200 on fast food this month. I should probably cut that back. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest tool that I use personally to help me with my finances, is knowing where everything's going and where it's coming from. So my incomes and expenses, just really getting down to the point for those. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if you at least understand, because most people, if you ask them what they spend their money on, they'll say, oh, I got a mortgage or a rent payment, oh, I've got this, and I set aside so much money for utilities or whatever. Then they often have a miscellaneous category. And miscellaneous is where you usually get killed, because it can a lot of times be the second or third largest category, and most people can't even describe what it is. So if they spend the time actually thinking about, well, I've had a lot of students tell me that one of the worst deals on campus was always the vending machine, right? But I had students who would go grab between classes things in the vending machine, or on their way in they stop at a Starbucks, right? and they don't think about it, but Starbucks 4 or 5 times a week and a vending machine 2 or 3 times a day, you're talking about hundreds of dollars a month. And again, bringing a sandwich from home versus buying something on campus, right off campus, again, hundreds of dollars a month.
Mhm.
But you're not going to be able to start controlling it until you understand what it is. I mean, you got to recognize what it is before you can start planning to control it. But controlling your spending is probably the most important thing, I think, in personal financing. But it's also as true in corporate finance as well. I mean, you look at what's going on right now during the pandemic, companies are cutting back on their expenditures as much as they possibly can. They're all trying to conserve cash for liquidity. And that's just as true for corporations as for individuals. You have to have liquidity in order to make sure you can pay the bills. And we're getting a little bit of an interesting thing now where most creditors are letting people for at least 3 months or so either pay only the interest on their loans or maybe nothing at all. But guess what? That debt's not going away. So at some point, think about on your balance sheet, it's a liability. It's something you're gonna have to pay sometime later on. So, but again, my guess is give yourself a fighting chance, and that is, track expense for a month or two, see where you can make some cuts. That's where the budgeting part comes in, and I think people who do a good job on budgeting probably are the ones that have the 2 or 3 or more months worth of emergency funds, and they are doing the things that are going to allow them to weather a tough storm or an unexpected expense.
Mhm. And that kind of brings me to one of the biggest challenges that students are having today, and the whole United States, right, is that there's something like 38 million people unemployed. um, and some of those people, I've seen a lot of people are not going to actually be going back to their works. These jobs are saying that we actually don't even need you to come back at some point. So for people that are starting off really, in the dirt, they didn't have a plan. What can they do now? Once they're already kind of down and out, how can they regain their footage?
Well, that's always a tough one, and of
Yeah.
course, one of the things on the finance side that is important is to talk to your creditors, the folks to whom you owe money. The worst you can do is ignore them, because it doesn't take very much to push people to bankruptcy, and that's not a very good place to be. Uh, One thing that's a lot different from when I first came out of school and was around your age. Back then, we didn't have to necessarily be as responsible for ourselves financially as you do today. When I got out of school, there were most of the organizations that had retirement plans were called defined benefit plans, which you meant part of your paycheck went into the plan, the employer put some money in there. They had these different rules, like say a rule of 85, which said that once your combination of your age and your years of experience was 85, you could retire and you knew exactly what you're going to get. They had a lot of things, rule of 90, rule of all kinds of stuff. Well, those are gone. There's no organizations doing defined benefit plans. Everything is now defined contribution, which means that you have an employer sponsored plan that, again, you can put money in and they'll match some money, which, by the way, is an important thing that you should always make sure you put enough in to get your employer's match, because that's money on the table that you're leaving if you don't at least match what the employer's willing to put in.
Yeah.
But a defined contribution, you control it. You get to decide how and where it's invested. And so your retirement is going to be based upon how successfully that money has been invested over your work life. And so that's quite different than it was back in the day. We have to manage our own credit scores. This was something when I first came out of college, we didn't have credit scores. And they had this really kind of when I think back to it, it's kind of archaic, but it was how it was done was we would get advice as college seniors about to graduate. We'd have all these little seminars about things we should think about. And one was about finance, and it talked about how you need to establish credit. So once you had a job, they said you should go buy something, even if you could afford to pay cash, buy it on credit, like a 90-day credit or something, and then make your payments on time. Then that established credit. And now if you have established credit, you could actually go get a car loan or something like that. Well, now everything's credit scores, and some people don't even realize, when you get your first apartment or something and you have utilities in your name, all that history of the utilities bills being paid in full and on time goes into your credit score. Paying your rent on time goes into your credit score. All those things, by the time you graduate from college, most people have a credit score. And it's up to you and me to maintain our credit scores. So we can't run credit cards up to the max and pay the minimum amounts. We can't miss payments on anything. Those are the kind of things that'll ruin your credit score, and then you're screwed for a while, at least anyway. But you want to avoid being in a personal bankruptcy. So one good thing right now is creditors are willing to listen to plans. Like I said, there's a lot of lenders who are allowing no payments at all, or just interest only payments for at least 3 months or more, and take advantage of that. But for someone who's just starting out, this is a tough time. There's we don't know how many of those lost jobs are going to come back. That's one of the biggest unknowns right now. Is we can kind of project the kinds of things that might come back full time, but there's no question in my mind that there's going to be less jobs available once we come out of this than there was before. But again, if you've got marketable skills, I'm always optimistic. I guess I should say I'm always optimistic that anyone who's got something to give to an organization that's, like I call it, value creating, you're going to get a job. There's going to be something out there for you, and maybe for at least temporarily, you might have to sell for something less than you'd want. But I think the point is getting your foot in the door and getting started and getting established, and that's the key, because the rest of it's going to come. I mean, sometimes you get impatient. I always say, if you remember in class, I'd say there's no entry-level CEO job unless you start your own company. Everyone starts towards the bottom, but I'm again very optimistic that people who have some marketable skills and the desire to work will always have an opportunity to do so.
Well, I think a lot of people could use your optimism right now. And I think not only that, I think they could use someone like you kind of around them to help them out in this kind of hard time where, it might be confusing. There's a lot of buzzwords going around in finance and econ, that it affects people directly, but, they might not actually know. And from someone who has kind of like a lifelong experience in teaching, what can you tell me, someone who's aspiring to, be a financial advisor, be a teacher? What would you tell me is a good kind of tip to kind of people open up with their finance? Because it could be kind of a taboo subject.
Mm-hmm. Well, have you thought about the CFP, Certified Financial Planner certification?
Yes.
I figure you probably looked at that, because that's kind of a no-brainer if you want to go that route. Is you want to get that CFP certification for sure. But as far as finance goes, it's kind of interesting, because you have subjects that people are willing to talk about and not willing to talk about. Finance tends to be one they're not as willing to talk about. But especially on one-on-one sessions, it's usually not that bad. I mean, especially if someone knows they need some guidance on a one-on-one session, it's people tend to open up. At least that's been my experience. I mean, there's they have nothing to gain being closed mouthed about it because you're trying to help them, right? But a lot of people don't like to tell you what their income is, or they don't want to tell you what they're spending their money on. And so you're right. There's a little bit of finessing to it, I think, to get the information that you need. But a lot of places use basic questionnaires, that get people to at least start thinking along the lines of what is their sources of income, what are they spending money on. There's a number of things people can do that at least puts them in the mind frame of here's what we're trying to do. And the goal is, the goal is to try to make your life easier or make your life better. And not too many people resist the idea of making their lives easier or better. So if they understand that being in control of your finances and being comfortable on a financial side really, really opens the doors for so many other things that are pleasurable in life. It's horrible to be living paycheck to paycheck and worrying about if you're going to be able to survive month to month. So to be able to be in a place where you've put a lot of that fear behind you opens the doors to do so many other things. And so that's how I always look at finance, is that we can help people become more comfortable. And if we can do that, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll definitely use that down the line, and hopefully helping people the same way you help people. And I really appreciate you kind of being on here, talking about your life, your experiences with finance and students. It definitely opens up the door for a lot of people to kind of be more open with their finances if they know that it's not a subject that needs to be, shameful of, right?
Oh, not at all. I mean, people like to talk about sports, right? I like to talk about politics. I like to talk about a lot of different things, but everybody's impacted by finances. That's kind of interesting to, when you lay it all out there. Like I say, it all comes down to finance at some point. So one of my goals always with my own kids was a good example is I said, look, I want you to feel like you can come and ask me anything, and you can choose to give me numbers or not give me. I don't care. You can just lay out a situation, but don't be afraid to come and ask me about anything, and that's always been kind of my mindset is, like my older brother is way smarter than me. He's an engineer, but he used to tell me things like one time I remember he called me and he said he was so excited because he was going to get about $5,000 back from taxes, right? And my reaction was that you're an idiot. And he says, what? He was all proud of himself. I said, no. I said, you just gave Uncle Sam an interest-free loan. I said, why would you want to give Uncle Sam an interest-free loan? I said, my goal always has been, I give myself about a $250 range. I said, I don't want to have to pay more than $250. I don't want to give back more than $250. I give it $500, and usually we stay pretty close to that, but that's, again, it's a simple thing that impacts every single one of us is taxes, right? But we can do strategies to try to ensure that we pay enough, right? But don't pay too much, because we're just interest-free lending money to the government if you're getting a big refund. So, again, just a little thing, but that just popped in my head as we were talking here.
No, definitely. And that's another big thing that people don't understand is their taxes. And we could do a whole podcast on taxes, because that's something that people could really help. I don't think anyone that I know does their own taxes right now in college. But again, thank you so much. And I appreciate you talking with us. And we'll definitely keep in contact with you down the line.
Yeah,
and,
you know where to find me. I don't know if we're ever going to get back in the building. I know the president just gave us a a letter. I don't know if you send out to the students as well, but they're going to try to start getting us back into the buildings here, I guess, in if not in June, certainly in July. So we'll see.
Yeah, we will. We
Yeah,
will. And
but again, if for anybody who's listening to the podcast, if you have never taken one and you have the opportunity to take a look at a personal finance class, it's so important to get just basics. And then I'll put in a little plug for the gentleman who used to write for Wall Street Journal. His name is Jonathan Clements. He's written several books. One of my favorites is called How to Think About Money. But he's got a blog site called The Humble Dollar, and it's free to go on to there. And he usually puts out a blog twice a month. And I don't know, have you ever seen that, Devin? Humble Dollar?
I believe you referenced it in our class. Yeah.
I think I brought in one of his articles one day for class.
Yeah, you definitely did.
But again, I don't get any kind of feedback. In fact, or any kickback on the site. I actually, it's because it's free. I send a donation to his blog every once in a while. But Humble Dollar is just a wonderful place to. If you just read the articles monthly, you get such a good idea of basics in finance all over the board, for people first starting out all the way to people getting ready into retirement. And there's so much information out there. So it just arms yourself with, I say, give yourself as much ammunition as you can. And having, reading things like Wall Street Journal and reading good books and looking at blog sites, that'll set you up well for the kind of things that you're all going to face at some point.
And is that kind of the last message you want to give?
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to end there. And Jonathan Clements, if you guys look at his blog and if you write him a note, tell him that Tom sent you.
All right, that sounds good. He'll get a little shout out. But thank you.
All right, you're welcome, Mr. Devin.